Okay, well, first of all, thank you to Sebastian and thank you to Andrew for the invitation to present today. As I'll be emphasising in my talk, we take the role and the need for consultation very, very seriously, and I think we've demonstrated that to the VLGA and to the entire sector when we did some work on local government about 4 or 5 years ago, but I'll come to that in a moment. I also just want to acknowledge my colleague Andrew Chow, who's heading up the team that will be overseeing the work program. And Andrew's already been travelling around the state, may have met some of you already, and I suspect that by the end of this project he'll have probably met all of you at some stage in the months ahead. Now, today's presentation, I'll just skip over that. You'll hear what I've got to say in a moment. Who are we? We're the Essential Services Commission. We were set up in 1994 with the privatisation of the energy sector. Our role was to oversee that market, having, given that market had been privatised, put into the private hands, and was delivered by service providers, often with a monopoly stake. Therefore, there was an imbalance between the power, if you like, of the providers and customers. So we developed an expertise in that area, and over time our role has grown, so we now have a role in water, in rail, in ports, in some domestic building insurance, and various other sectors. We also perform taxis and tow trucks, I should say. We also perform inquiries for the government from time to time, and they can be pretty much on anything. So a few years ago we did a very large review on vocational education training, the fee and funding model. And a year or two after that, we did a big review on the TAC and work cover. So very varied, and the people we employ to do that, you can see down here, a lot of economists, accountants, engineers, lawyers, but also philosophers, historians, political scientists. So I'd like to think that we're not just an organisation of squareheads. I'm the chair full-time, got 2 part-time commissioners. And then we've got a staff of about 65, so that's probably going to grow a little bit in the months ahead. And occasionally we get in technical experts to help us with various bits and pieces. Now, as I said, we have had a role in local government before. In 2010-11, the then Minister Richard Wynne asked us to look at establishing a performance monitoring framework for the sector. And again, we were out there. At the time, I set Andrew the task of in 6 months, he had to have 200 face-to-face meetings. I think he exceeded that. We've made our recommendations to the government. Believe it or not, we had 74 out of 79 councils signed up voluntarily, because we had no legislative power. We had 74 councils signed up to go into the pilot stage of that reporting framework. There was a change of government, change of priorities, and that framework sort of got shelved for a while, and now the department has picked it up, and I believe is rolling it out in the near future. I found that exercise intriguing, and I became quite intrigued by local government and spent my weekends in libraries and second-hand bookstores finding books on the history of local government, and I traced it back 150 years or so, actually even further, going all the way back to New South Wales. And I wrote a paper and published a paper on my time about why is it so hard when you say to local government, what do you do? And they can't try and tell you. And then when you get to the why question, it gets even harder. So I published a paper which sort of tied up that observation with the history of the sector, and I'm happy to share that with you. We were also asked to look at the reporting burden that the state government, through its various agencies, imposes on local government, and we provided a report to government on how that reporting burden could be reduced. I think it was in the order of around 20%, something to that effect. Now we've got this piece of work in 2015, looking at the so-called rate capping and variation framework. Now, what's the government's objectives from that framework? Well, Mark's already wrong one. I've got to skip the slide. Government's objective. There should be a slide there about the government's objectives. Well, Mark's already looked at that, and I agree with the terms that he highlighted. He highlighted council autonomy, accountability and transparency, as well as the need for rates and charges that are efficient, stable and reflective of community needs. Now Mark also highlighted the term financial sustainability. I'm not going to highlight that because for me that's encompassed in efficiency. You can't be operating efficiently if you're not financially stable. So for me it's already covered by that requirement for us to have regard to the efficiency of the government's objective of this framework having regard to the efficiency of the sector. Now, the matters we need to provide advice on, that slide there. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the design of the cap, what does it apply to, what is the basis of the cap, how is it calculated, what's included, what's not included, the variation process, so where council doesn't think it can come in within the cap, what will be required by council in order to satisfy us that the proposed rate increase is required. And then there are a whole bunch of things we need to have regard to. And I just want to point out a couple of those. Mark's already referred to VLGA's various reports, and of course insights from New South Wales. But I just want to highlight that first, don't read the first, I'll point that one there. A really important development in Victoria, I believe, for this framework, which is different to New South Wales and from New South Wales, is that we will have this reporting framework, this service reporting framework in Victoria. That is really critical, and just keep that in mind as I go through the rest of my presentation. Now, our approach for the review, we want to be out there better understanding what's going on out in the sector, what are the challenges that you confront. In developing a framework, we want one that obviously meets the government's objectives. It's not up to us to design those objectives, they're the government's objectives. One that is beneficial for communities, ratepayers and councils, and I stress that. It's got to work for all parties. This is not an exercise in bureaucratic elegance. We could come up with the most elegant model, but if it doesn't actually help anybody, well, what's the point? And then there's a quote from Einstein, which I like, which is, we should make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. So that will certainly be guiding the way we think. And Mark certainly referred to us not building a huge complex edifice, I think were his words, and we certainly won't be building a huge complex edifice. As I say, we'll make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. We'll adopt a principled approach, and I'll come to that in a moment. And then we'll consult some more, and then we'll consult even more. And why I say that is for three reasons. One is we want to learn. There's a lot going on in the sector. The sector faces not a single set of challenges. It faces challenges in many different dimensions, different size councils, different locations, different demographics, etc., etc. We need to understand all that. Second reason is because we don't. I like to think I'm very smart, but I accept that we don't have a monopoly on good ideas, so we want to hear the ideas that you have. And the third reason is that we want you to test our thinking. So as we come up with ideas, we'll put them out there. That's why we put out that paper last week. We want you to test those ideas. Come back to us, challenge us, make us think about them, provide us some alternative ways through. Let's debate it. I'm not, Andrew, we're not afraid of debate. So let's have the debate. So the bottom line in all that is, don't think of the framework as something that is being done to you. It's being done to the sector. Think about it as something that you are helping to design, to build, and eventually to implement. Now, I said we're going to take a principled approach. Now, why I say this is from many years of experience, both at the Commission and before that. I find you go through these reviews, you get to the end, you put out your recommendations or your conclusions, and everybody says, oh, we don't like that. And you say, why? They say, oh, because we don't. We don't like it, you've got it wrong. And it's like, yeah, but why have we got it wrong? Oh, well, it's wrong. So the approach we're going to take now and over the next few months is that we're going to build the story in layers. So the paper we put out last week is that foundational layer. It's the principles that are going to guide us as we think about what makes a good framework. So that we identified 8 principles, and as I said, we'd like you to come back and tell us if you got it wrong. The first 3 I don't think are particularly contentious. Diversity, it just recognises that local governments differ in their needs, their priorities and their resources. Principle 2, accountability, that you can read it there, local communities and ratepayers are entitled to hold their councils to the highest standards of accountability and transparency when setting rates. And 3, responsibility, the framework should support the autonomy of councils to make decisions in the long-term interest of the communities and ratepayers. So I don't think any of that is something that is particularly contentious. The next 3 are probably a little bit more contentious. Rigour. So principle number 4 states that councils will need to satisfy the burden of proof outlined in the framework when seeking a variation above the cap. Now, we haven't established what that burden of proof will be, but the important bit is it's on the onus is on the councils to prove that what they're proposing is necessary, is needed, and is supported by their communities. And I think that, don't think of it as a report to us, a proposal to us. Think of it as a proposal to your community. And therefore, they are entitled to expect that a burden of proof is satisfied before you put up the rate that you charge them. Priorities, this is probably the most contentious, I suspect. Rate increases should be considered only after all viable options have been explored. I can't remember if it was Andrew or Sebastian that referred to this one. But this is really about councils demonstrating, as I say to us, but really to their communities, that they've asked themselves the hard questions before putting up a variation proposal to us, which is, do we really need to do everything we're doing? Are we doing, or that we're proposing to do? Are we doing everything as cleverly as we could? Is there a smarter way to deliver these services that might mean a lower cost? And of course, and I can't remember who mentioned, I think it was Mark, have we looked at funding options for how these different services or facilities might be provided? So demonstrating that has actively been considered, and therefore the priorities of council have been set in accordance with that thinking will be an important part of this framework. The 6th one is the framework should support best practice planning, management systems and information sharing to uphold council decision making. The hidden message in that is this. People often say, oh, we can't do that because we have to do our council plans then, or we're deep in our budget process then. Or, oh, that's the summer holidays and you've got to realise nothing much happens in local government between the start of December and the end of January. Right? Why do we have to take any of those things as fixed? Let's think about, is there a way to realign some of those requirements so that it all fits together? I don't want you to think that this variation framework is something that gets stuck another layer. Because I know that's the temptation, to think, oh, we've got to do everything else, and here they're doing something else to us. Don't think about it that way. Think about how do we integrate the whole thing so that everything is self-supporting. So the council plan supports any variation, and that supports any asset plan, and that supports any, what's it called, the budget, the documents you have to produce, and there's the other one, the strategic resource plan. Right? See it all as an integrated whole. How do we integrate it so that it works best for you? Okay? Because you're the ones who are going to have to deal with this on a day-to-day basis. Next two, again, I don't think these will be too problematic. One is flexibility. The framework should be flexible and adaptable. Someone referred to the storms in New South Wales. We've obviously had, was it around 2010 or so when we had the big floods here, and the year before we had the big fires. So we understand these things. But it also reflects the fact that as we do this, as we implement this rate capping and variation framework, we, being us, being the sector, being the department, being communities, are going to learn. And we're going to realise that, hey, you know what, we could tweak it a bit here, tweak it a bit there. We should be open to that. The last thing I want is to put in place something, walk away from it, and then it just sits there ossifying, and in a few years' time, it's just a worthless imposition. And finally, robust. Probably not the best term. There should be few surprises for ratepayers and councils in the implementation of the framework. I think we should probably call this one predictable, or predictability. because what we're talking about is we lay out, if you sort of comply with the requirements, then it should be very clear to you what we are very likely to decide or recommend. Right? There shouldn't be an element of arbitrariness in it. It should be very predictable. You know, for any regulator, or at least any economic regulator, that is an incredibly important principle. That you know the rules, and you know that if you comply with the rules, you know the outcome that you will get from the regulator. So to summarise those principles, I'm going to quote myself if you don't mind. So it's called Message from the Chairperson, and I wrote these words. You know, while we are very mindful of the need for simplicity when designing the framework, we are also determined that the framework does not inadvertently or partially shift responsibility for rate setting from councils to the Commission, us. Councils are responsible for the services they provide and therefore the rates they levy and the legacies they leave. The framework will clearly place the onus on councils to demonstrate that their rates are being set in line with the services they provide to their communities and in line with the long-term interests of their ratepayers. That goes back to that financial stability issue. Now, some other important considerations, I'll skip over these very quickly. I've mentioned alignment with all the other planning internal processes we have, but also I've also mentioned the linkages to the reporting framework that is being developed. So I think that is crucial and critical to the way this whole new framework operates. Now, how do we plan to engage? We'll be talking to peak bodies, we'll be talking to the VLGA, we'll be attending as many events like these as we're invited to. We'll be out on the road, you know, particularly Andrew and the team, but also me. Ministers establishing a consultative panel, and of course we'll be talking to the communities to the best extent that we can. We'll be doing all the normal things of submissions and public forums and the like. Now, if I could urge everyone in here, because obviously you're engaged with this, that's the reason you're here, but if I could urge you to encourage your colleagues out there in the sector to read what we do, or at least be briefed by your staff on what we're doing, because often I find people get very worked up, very angry about what they think we're doing. And then we go out, we have a chat to them, and they say, "Oh, I didn't realise that." So please, if you could just urge your colleagues out there, who obviously aren't here, to just spend a little bit of time looking at the material we produce. We have gone to extraordinary lengths to try and make it as simple as possible, as readable as possible. We're really good at writing really long, boring reports. On this occasion and in our previous work in local government, we really tried to make it as readable, as accessible as possible. If we do have to write a long and boring report, I promise you we'll do that. It'll be on our website, but the main report will be small and readable. Now, just before I finish, Sebastian talked about turning back the tide and not seeing it as this the challenge. That's a debate you can take up with the government. No point in taking it up with me because I've been told to go and develop this framework. But I think the paper that the VLGA commissioned from Peter McKinley summed it up really, really nicely. And these are Peter's words, they're not mine. And bear with me as I read this. In conclusion, the argument in this paper suggests that the local government sector should see the state government commitment to introduce a rate capping regime as an opportunity rather than a threat. And in practice, an opportunity, this is important, an opportunity for both the state and local government to start depoliticising rate setting and improving understandings, this is a really important bit, of who should be responsible for funding what activities and how. It's the final paragraph of this conclusion. So I urge you to see this as an opportunity for that discussion with not only your communities, but with the other levels of government. Now, very finally, our consultation process, it's there in the paper for you to have a look at. It's very detailed. We've put out our consultation paper now. We're now out talking to as many people as we can. We will then have a draft report in July. We will then keep talking, keep testing the ideas, and then finally we'll be handing our report to Minister, the government, later in the year, in October, November. And as Mark said, it'll then be up to the government to decide what it does with that report. We anticipate we'll have a role going forward, but the exact nature of that role is what we're going to be working out in the months ahead. So, thank you.